Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
I'm Susan Coffin. You're listening to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts Audio. As adults with ADHD and learning disabilities, so many of us find it very difficult to select a career that really works for us. And once we have a job, staying focused and interested in the workplace can be equally difficult. Deciding whether and how to ask for accommodations is also a sticky issue for many people. We're so fortunate to have Wilma Fellman today. She's hosting the Career Clinic for ADHD adults, and she'll talk about how to make better career choices and how to have more success in the workplace. Wilma Fellman is a licensed professional career counselor, has been in practice for over 30 years, specializing in ADHD, LD, and other challenges in the workplace. She's the author of an extremely helpful book, which I recommend to all of you, called Finding a Career That Works for You, and a frequent contributor, I'm happy to say, to Attitude Magazine. Wilma, thank you so much for being with us today. We're very grateful to you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me, Susan. I really appreciate being here today. We want to do a career clinic today for adults with ADD, and I will use ADD and ADHD interchangeably throughout this lecture. We're going to talk about making better choices, making better initial choices, as well as making better transitional choices as a mature adult down the road. For lots of reasons, people are making transitions, either their own choice or a choice imposed on them, downsizing, layoffs, firing, and just, I hate my job. So I hope you're listening with some of these questions in mind. I did go online and take a look at some of the questions that people had asked up front, and I hope to incorporate them into what I'm speaking about. For example, the 59-year-old person who is essentially starting over. What do you do? Where do you go? How do you have more success in the future and less probability of failure? The 39-year-old person who is about to be homeless, starting over and over and over again because things only work for just so long and then they don't work anymore. The attorney who felt that he or she had found their dream job until it changed, and then all of a sudden the dream job doesn't fit anymore, or so it seems. And the person who's having some difficulties with social skills on the job, not being able to read people properly and having that interfere with what they do in their job. Years ago, I've been doing this for 30 years. I became intensely interested in the ADD population because, as I've said in many lectures, I raised what I consider to be the ADD poster child, a son who had all the symptoms at a very young age, and really taught me an awful lot about ADD, and also taught me through the process of his diagnosis that I too live inside an ADD body. And so my career development background, which I've had for many years, together with my intense interest in this population, has made me focus on it for the last 30 years. I love when people ask me, is there a list of ADD-friendly jobs? And I will typically throw back to them, do you think that there's a list for best jobs with for those people with blue eyes, or best jobs for someone with one arm? And here I'd like to tell you a very short anecdote that is a true story of one of my very first clients from 1983. I was a very young counselor, very idealistic. I was trying to do the recipe type. If this is wrong with you, this is the kind of job that you might need to go into. And I met a client that changed my life forever. She was a young woman who called herself a thalidomide baby. She had been born with no arms and one leg due to her mother having taken a drug while she was pregnant with her that resulted in some horrific deformities. My client had tried some prosthetics, didn't really like prosthetic arms, so she essentially had what she called nubs, and they were soft tissue, essentially where our elbows are. So no arm, no forearm, no hands, and one leg. She did wear a prosthetic leg. When I'm speaking to counselors, I typically ask them to conjure up what they feel would be a good career match for someone who has no arms and one leg. And very often, even very seasoned career counselors will fall into the trap of saying, well, she could probably do a sedentary type job, maybe work at a computer with an adaptation or some wireless software, perhaps be a counselor of some sort, and then I tell them about the real person. She was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Michigan with a degree in fine arts. She was a professional photographer. Back in 1983, photography was not digital. You had to develop all of your own films if you were a pro. She did that beautifully. She had won all kinds of awards for one-woman show type exhibits, and she was lecturing around the world with her one-woman show. But she needed a day job. She needed something to pay the bills. And at the time that I met her, she was applying for jobs at high-speed developing places where you took your roll of film and within 24 hours you got it back. Okay, so picture that she sends in her resume, Phi Beta Kappa, graduate, photography, awards. An employer can't wait to interview her. And then she walked through the door. And they saw that she had no arms, didn't notice that she had no legs because of the prosthetic leg. But an interview of the most ineffective type would ensue. They wouldn't ask her any questions about her deformity. They went through the motions of an interview, said, we'll call you and we'll get back to you. And essentially, she wasn't getting any jobs. And she was really, really aggravated. At the time, she believed that she had no deformities. She had no disabilities to speak to an employer about. She was raised to believe that she could do whatever she wanted to do and whatever she did well. And so she wasn't about to discuss it in an interview. The end result of this was that we intervened. We went to an employer and said, please hire her for a week. And if you don't like her work, just call me and let me know, and I will talk to her about it. She did beautifully. He hired her midweek. She did trainings for him. A year and a half later, when we called back to check on placements, she was doing training. She was doing one-woman shows. She had a wonderful placement. And what this story always tells me over and over again is if we make assumptions about someone's disability, we may lead them down the wrong path. This woman was also on a volleyball team. She drove her own car. She had no disability. And so I asked myself, if this is true of someone with no arms and one leg, what is true of people with other kinds of disabilities, like ADD? What is true of someone who has what we call a mysterious disability, which is ADD, a disability that comes and goes, a disability that may be there one day and not the next day. So those of us that are service providers of the ADD population have the toughest job because we have to start with everything that's positive and work back to how the disability impacts on the person. So we're going to talk about making initial choices, transitioning into new jobs, and problematic areas. How do we know if we should leave a job or stay there? So we ask ourselves, what is the best way to choose an appropriate career? Well, we need to get all of our ducks in a row, and that means collecting a lot of data. We collect data on every facet of the person. If I just give you an interest inventory, that's only going to tell me what you're interested in. I could be interested in brain surgery. I may not have the skills or the aptitude for it. So I'm going to have to collect more than just interest. I'm going to collect interests, skills, and accomplishments. What is your personality type, and how does that enter into the whole picture? So, for example, I may be an internal processor by personality, meaning I am more of an introverted type processor. I think about a problem until I've worked it through, and then, and only then, will I share it with the rest of the world. What if I were working in an advertising agency as part of a think tank with 20 other people, and we're all shooting off ideas really quickly, one after the other after the other, and I'm an internal processor, I'm not saying anything. That would be a personality type trait. So I could be interested in this field, I could be skilled and have the accomplishments, but it may not work for my personality. I could be a detailed person working in an overview type job. That would be another example of a personality trait that doesn't fit. I also want to look into the person's value system. Some people say, I would do anything as long as I can earn a lot of money. And they really don't mean that. If it doesn't fit your value system, you're not going to feel good about it. So we need to tap into what you value and both your work values and your leisure values. We want to take a look at aptitude. Most people know about aptitude tests from school, and the truth is that most aptitudes remain pretty consistent from the time you're in, let's say, high school through adulthood, unless you suffer some sort of calamity or something that injures your abilities and your aptitudes. So if you use an aptitude test from high school, it's going to give you a pretty good idea of which of the broad categories of aptitude are your strengths and which were your challenges. We also want to take a look at what your early dreams were. If you wanted to be a clown when you were a child, it doesn't necessarily mean you should go be a clown as an adult. Or if you had this passion to be a fireman because you loved excitement, does that mean that you necessarily have to be a fireman? What we're looking for in early dreams is what are the linking patterns that give us a clue. So maybe it isn't that you should be a clown, but maybe you enjoy making people laugh, or you enjoy making people feel comfortable or at ease, and what are the jobs that would correlate with that? What are your work habits and patterns? We know that employers like an optimal candidate for a job. That's a given. So there are places where you can go to find out what is optimal for any given job. And we use resources that are on the web for finding out the essential tasks of any job. And by the way, if I were to ask any of you listening, how many jobs can you name within a minute? Some of you might fill a page. Many of you would fill a half a page. There are over 44,000 jobs that are listed in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, and we only know handfuls of them by our exposure. So it's important for us to find out what's out there that matches with what we're all about. So we look at what is my work pattern and how does it fit for what I'm thinking of doing. And we don't have to guess anymore about what it takes to do the optimal whatever, the optimal dentist, the optimal attorney, the optimal respiratory therapist. We can read about it within minutes and find out what is required of the optimal candidate. And then we can say, does that sound like me? If it does, keep reading. If it doesn't, why? What doesn't line up? And that's where we go in for remedial type exploration. Notice that the final duck that we get in a row is challenges. It's not that I'm professing to ignore challenges. I'm just saying don't start with them, finish with them. Start with everything that's right and gain this whole, I see it almost like mixing a cake with ingredients. You toss all of the ingredients into a bowl and you stir. And it's that stirring process that usually requires a professional to help you. Otherwise, what you end up with is a whole pile of test results and you don't know what to do with them. And they all seem disjointed. It's that stirring process and adding in the challenges that makes for the attempt to find the perfect job for you. What if you are transitioning? You're not finding your first job anymore. And I just want to make one other point about finding your first job. If you're a young adult or working with a young adult or you have a young adult in your home, going through that process of acquiring all of those ducks in a row is not an instant fix. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 10, depending on how long it takes to gather all of your data. And it ends with reading about the jobs that seem most associated with you, talking about the jobs with people who are doing what you're thinking of doing, and then observing the jobs that you're thinking of doing. So for a young adult, this might be an internship. It might be job shadowing. It might simply be observing that job for an hour. Whatever you can do, it is opening the window of vision for what you think a job is like versus what it is like. Okay, so let's say you are now a mature adult and you're transitioning into a new career. And this goes back to some of the questions that were asked on the website that I was looking at. The 59-year-old, the 39-year-old, the attorney whose job changed. So what do you do if you're in a job and you need to change? How do you know if you should stay or go? How do you know whether you shouldn't just switch careers altogether, or is there a way to make this job that you're in still work? And what I like to do is to start with a work history. I think this is essential for people with ADHD. It's essential for everybody, but it's really essential for those of us with ADD because we don't always have that ability to look inward and see what our part in something was, both the success and the failure. So if we start with the most recent job and move back, noting the dates that we were there, the jobs that we held, the skills that we used, and what we liked most about the job, what we disliked about it. And when we do this for more than one job, if we're a mature adult, you are going to see some patterns. And every time you see something that sounds real familiar because it's the same story that happened in the previous and the previous and the previous job, circle it and record it as a pattern. And that's what you're going to need to work on with somebody. And I say work on it with somebody because even career counselors and career coaches need to work with somebody to help them process all of this. We can't do it on ourselves. It's almost like we can't be our own dentist. We can't be our own career coach. All right, and then we make two piles. What skills would you like to use more? What jobs line up with those skills? And again, let's do research on those jobs that line up with your skills. If you find that you liked most of the things about the job, but there were maybe, 10% of the job that didn't fit for you, then circle that, and that is what you would work on with a coach. I am not a coach, but I'm always talking up coaching because I believe that ADD coaches are the key to having someone succeed in their job and sustain that success. So that career coach can help you figure all this out. What worked, what didn't, why, and should you leave or should you go? Okay, so here we are. Should I leave or should I go? Sometimes it's the emotion of the moment that makes you think that this job cannot be saved. I hate it. I hate going in every day. And we speak in very global terms. But what the process that I just mentioned will help you break down into tiny little pieces which things you really liked, which things you didn't like at all, and why. And then we want to ask ourselves, the things we didn't like and why, could we find accommodations and modifications and strategies that would change those few things we didn't like and bring it up to be that we are still the best person for that job. I'm always talking about don't mash the square peg into the round hole. You don't want 35 accommodations in order to do your job. You want to be able to do your job with as few accommodations as possible, and that's why I profess that you figure out ahead of time, and this is great for the young adults, what is it you do better than the average bear? What is it that you shine at? What do you love to do? It will require less of your effort, and it will be a joy to do. And does a job have no challenges ever? Very few. You're always going to find something that's a little tougher to do, but if you are always swimming upstream, and my rule of thumb is that at least 75% of a job should fit you pretty hand in glove, should fit you perfectly. If you need 25% accommodation, or less. Okay, then find out what you're going to take and how will you do it in the most expedient way. And again, a coach can help you with that. I've included what I call the ADD Workplace Questionnaire in this handout. It's long, but it's really good. What it is an opportunity to zero in on what it is that you do best and where your gotchas are. So, for example, if I look at the ADD Workplace Questionnaire, it asks you to rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 4, where 0 is no problem at all and 4 is an extreme problem. How much trouble do you have with all of these areas? And notice that they are all the areas of ADD: inattention and distractibility, hyper-focusing, impulsivity, and so forth. But even more importantly, it breaks it down into tiny little pieces that address the world of work. So on the subject of inattention, it talks about, I frequently shift from one activity to another at work. I'm easily distracted by conversations. My mind wanders. It's hard for me to return to a task, and so forth. If you have no problem and you're getting 0s or 1s on all of these, then just move on. If you're getting 3s or 4s, that's where you need help. And a coach can help you work out strategies to accommodate these gotchas. On the last page of this questionnaire are examples of reasonable accommodations in the workplace. And there's a big list. There's 30. Medication is appropriate for you. Not everybody can take medication. If it's appropriate, it can be a godsend. Private space. No, you can't always walk into a boss and say, you are a person with a disability and you need a private office. That's not always going to fly. So if you need private space, if you need to not be so distracted, can you wear some earphones with some soundproofing and white noise? Can you find some things that you can do easily, cheaply, and maybe even without addressing them to your employer, that will just be things that help you work easier. One thing that I like to suggest that people say to an employer, instead of saying the big declaration, I have a disability, and right away they get scared. They don't understand ADD, and for good reason. As we talked about before, ADD is not like other disabilities. It's not always the same. And so it's hard enough for us to understand why it's so consistently inconsistent. How could we explain it properly to an employer without them getting scared that they need to watch us all the time? So I believe, and this is my personal preference, that it's best to leave the declaration out of the workplace. You do need it in the education arena, but in the workplace, lead with your strengths. Say to the employer, I work best if. So, for example, I work best if I'm not distracted by outside noises. So is it okay if I wear noise-canceling earphones? Or I work best if I record our board meetings so I don't miss anything. Is that okay? It's just accomplishing the same thing, but it is leaving off the the piece that they might become frightened of if they're not educated in what ADD is. It's not that we're ashamed of it. I'm also not ashamed that I have certain physiological complexities. It might be high blood pressure. It might be diabetes. And I don't bring those into my interview, and I don't bring them into my workplace unless they're relevant. And if you do the work up front, if you do the planning up front, then you will know before you even get to an interview, let alone a job situation. You will know that that job works for you with as few accommodations and modifications as possible. And you will know which modifications you might need and how to get them for yourself without declaring. So I'm a big proponent of leading with your strengths, stressing your strengths, and knowing what it is that you can do before you even step into the workplace arena. Just two things I want to mention before we open up to questions. I mentioned my number 30 on my reasonable accommodations is coaching, coaching, coaching. And again, I'm not an advertisement for coaching. I am not a coach. I believe in coaching. And there are many wonderful websites for people to find a coach that can work with them. One such website is the ACO, or ADHD Coaches Organization, and their website is adhdcoaches.org, and they can help you find a coach that can work with you. Another wonderful website that I'm affiliated with is the Edge Foundation, and I'm affiliated with it. They provide coaching for kids and adults. And Denise Von Preston is the contact person at the Edge Foundation who can help you find an appropriate coach for yourself or for your child. And she can be found at edgefoundation.org. And Victoria Roche, career coach, and I are the trainers of a new program that Edge has partnered with us to provide to coaches, teaching coaches how to gain the ADD piece. Teaching ADD coaches to gain the career piece. They already have the ADD piece, but we are offering a 6-week CCEU class called Career Services Specialty Training that offers 13 CCEUs to coaches, so that if you are a coach looking to help your clients in the career piece, you can do it. We're starting a new class this summer, June 26th. It runs to August 7th. We're doing it in the morning, 11:30 Eastern Time, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Time, because we are including some European coaches that expressed an interest in being part of this class. So we wanted it at a time when we're all awake. So that can be found also on the edgefoundation.org website, and these are resources for everybody. I'm excited about them because they work, and I love what I do. I love when you complete a workup with someone, and for possibly the first time in their life, they know what it is that they sparkle at, and the energy is there, and the focus is there, and they can overcome tremendous challenges if it's right for them in the majority of ways.
Thank you so much. Well, that was great. We've got lots of wonderful questions here, so let me turn to some of them. Here's a really interesting one from someone who asks the question, how important is it to be passionate about your work when you have ADHD? Because I think people with ADHD are frequently told, find what your passion is. And this person says, my passion's aircraft, but it's not a field in which there are many opportunities. Mm-hmm. How does one substitute or segue from a passion to a career choice where there might be more options? His specific question is maybe an interest like problem solving. Does that substitute for a passion? How do you cope with that? I love X, but X doesn't have lots of opportunity.
Okay, great question. Yes, you should be passionate about what you do. That's the whole goal, and that's why we work on all different facets of the person to find out where your passions really lie, not only your interest passions, but your value passions, and your activities that you've done in your leisure time. To give you an example, I years ago was working with a sales rep who was selling some kind of, I don't know, it was a nut and bolts kind of product. And he had very little passion about it. He found it boring. He found it hard to focus. And he said, I know that I'm a good salesman, I think. Anyway, we went through a whole workup with him and found that when we did the values clarification piece, we found that he loved golfing. And golf is like aircraft. The only thing that comes to mind is, well, can I be a professional golfer? No, most people can't be a professional golfer. But with his amazing sales skills and his wonderful work background, he simply transitioned into representing golfing equipment. It wasn't, rocket science to figure this out, but he was suddenly talking golf all the time and all the different aspects of it. And so it's a way of simply taking a passion from one column and dragging it into another column. So you are, the person that's interested in aircraft might want to Google careers involving aircraft and find that there's advertising, there's public relations, there's sales, there's marketing, there's all kinds of things that work about the whole field of aircraft, and it might not be designing, or it might be designing, it might be engineering, it might be working at the airport. It just helps us have a clue to add to a pile. One clue in and of itself isn't enough. We need the whole pile.
Okay, that's great. A number of people are asking whether you recommend any, or you've had good success with any of the standard career assessment tools, on, what's this one called? When someone's mentioned the Highlands assessment, someone else has wondered about Johnson O'Connor. Are there any, commonly available career, cost-effective career testing techniques that you have had good experience with?
Yes, there are a ton of them. We talk about them in our class, and Vicki, my partner, is a guru on all of the available current assessments, standardized assessments that are available for people to take a look at their interests and their personality in particular. Those two pieces are the ones that most people are talking about. The strong interest inventory is always good. There are places to use it for free on the internet.
Strong? It's S-T-R-O-N-G, right? Strong.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It used to be Strong Campbell, and they were partners and they split, so there was a Strong and there was a Campbell. I've used the Strong. Vicki has used the Strong. Lots of people know about it, and what we like about it is that you can do it on the computer. There are paid sites and there are free sites. Obviously, you get what you pay for in terms of how much feedback you get. So if you're paying for it, you're going to get this beautiful printout that not only shows you where your interest clusters tend to lie, but also what areas of work match those interest clusters and which specific job titles within those areas of work you might want to take a look at. And so those kinds of assessments are wonderful. We caution people to not take them so literally. And here's an example of why. When I was in graduate school, we had to take all of those tests and give all of those tests. When I took the Strong, at that time it was the Strong Campbell, it indicated that I might want to think about becoming a shepherd. And yeah, it did. And I've given these assessments to hundreds of people over the 30 years that I've been a career counselor. And I caution them, do not latch onto a job title and dismiss this as hogwash because it's not practical or it's silly. What was that telling me back then was in my first life, in my first part of my career, right out of college as a young adult, I was an English teacher. I taught high school English, speech, and debate. I loved having a flock. And I made that transition to what was that clue trying to tell me. I have, in the last 30 years, done tons of webinars and live presentations and things that are on the computer and YouTubes and so forth. I do love a flock. So even though at the time it seemed like, I live in the Detroit metropolitan area, there's not a big call for shepherds. So the tendency is to latch on to the job title rather than what is that title telling you about what it is that I should best be suited for. So when you go through these assessments, keep that in mind. One other thing I want to mention is that you can go to community colleges and university career centers, and they will let you, for free, if you are in that catchment area, especially for community colleges, take those standardized types of tests on their computer, get the printout, and then take it perhaps to a counselor or a coach to help process it with you.
That's a great suggestion, because one of the questions that's being posed here by lots of people is concerned about the cost of coaching, the cost of this, and specifically, both the people on the webinar are oftentimes without a job or looking for a new job, and also sort of the ADD focused problems with budgeting and so forth makes it hard for many people to imagine being able to afford coaches or career counselors. Any other thoughts on that? I know that it's a big concern, and we run into this frequently.
It is a real concern, and the worst time, there was someone that had posted a question on your website that they were about to be homeless and what can be done quickly. The worst time to work on this process is when you're in a crisis like that. And so I usually recommend to someone, if they are out of work, get a temporary job. Get a job, any job, just to get some income. And if it's a temp job, that's great too. It'll give you some, a byproduct of that is to give you some additional feedback on some work skills that you might have. But the process of looking inward and finding out, either initially because you're a young adult or remedially because you're a mature adult, is a process. And because it takes anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks, it would be very distracting to have to worry about losing your home and researching careers in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. It's going to be seem very relevant to you. So survival is number one. Get a job, any kind of job, while you're going through the process. How much does the process cost? Again, for those people who would like to try a totally free approach, the career centers at community colleges and universities, and this is not the same as the counseling center. It's the career center. Those are two different things. Will provide you with no-cost testing, and depending on the career center, and they all differ, there may be a paraprofessional there that will help you to digest the information. So that's one option that's totally free. Coaches charge by the hour, and there is a full gamut range of how much they charge. And if you go to their websites, if you go to a website like theedgefoundation.org or ADHDcoaches.org and see Find a Coach and click on those, you will begin to see, and you can interview people by email or by phone in terms of how they work, how long they take, and what they charge. And there will be a pretty big range. So interview people, and it's kind of like dating. You've got to find the one that most fits you. If you go to a counselor, there are vocational tech centers. There are vocational centers, and I used to work at one that was funded through United Way and other private sources. If you look online in your catchment area for vocational centers or career centers, they had a sliding scale where I worked where they slid all the way down to $2 per session. So there are ways that's guidance.
Have you heard of the vocational rehabilitation offices? This is suggested by one of the members of the webinar, suggesting that those, I guess, are local services that might
They're
offer.
usually funded by the state. They're funded through, in the United States, they're usually funded through your state funds, and depending upon state to state, I live in Michigan, so the Michigan Rehab Association will have a site that will help link you with assessment and matching of your deficits with someone that can work with you. In the cases of a lot of vocational centers, like the one I worked at, it was a JBS, and they're located all over the United States. They work with the state organizations so that if something costs money, like let's say somebody needs a situational assessment, they need to be looked at on the job, how do they do something within a certain period of time, then it might be the state that actually funds it to the vocational center.
Okay, that's very helpful. Question here about being an entrepreneur or a business, owning your own business. What's your feeling on that for people with ADHD? The person posting the question says, it seems that, it makes sense. On the other hand, people with ADHD may have problems prioritizing or in general organizing their work. Is there any general advice on that topic,
Yes.
or is this again a personal issue?
Well, both. David Gork loves to talk about entrepreneurial endeavors, and he's marvelous at that. He's an ADD coach and trainer. And he usually says that when it's the right fit, it can be phenomenal. It can be like just, you woke up and you're in heaven. It's still, and Ned Hollowell talks about this as well, it's still an individual thing in terms of the individual needs to know what they do best and what they don't do best. And as long as you have a good handle on which hats you can wear and which hats you need to delegate to somebody else, then entrepreneurial endeavors could be wonderful for you. But what sometimes happens is that an individual with ADD assumes that they can wear all the hats just because they are tired of working under someone else. They would like to work for themselves, and they may have time management issues. They may have an inability to schedule. They may have all kinds of distracting deficits. And if they can delegate to the right people to pick up the things that they don't do well, then it can be a wonderful, wonderful choice. My caution is that oftentimes it's a myth that everybody with ADD should go into their own, should be an entrepreneur, because for those people that it works for, it's great. And for those that it doesn't work for, it can be the kiss of death. And they can feel like, well, look at that. There's another place I failed. I even failed at entrepreneur. And I thought that was the thing that every ADD person can do. But we know that every ADD person can't do everything.
Well, there's actually some related questions which are interesting in light of this entrepreneur. A number of people have said something. Here's one example, but there are 4 or 5 questions like this. After 2 or 3 years on a job, I master the tasks and I find myself without any challenges, and then I either quit or transfer to another position. And someone else says, my issue is follow through and boredom. Once the interesting bits have been learned, I lose interest. And people are asking how to handle that. It strikes me in terms of the entrepreneurship, there's always boring stuff that has to be done when you're an entrepreneur. So,
yes.
Yes. But in general, every job, I think, that is a challenge, I'm sure, for many of your clients.
Oh, yes.
If there's not something new and interesting. Boredom, right.
I'm really glad they brought that up, because boredom can set in even if you have your dream job, and even if it's the best job for you. And individuals with ADD can be more susceptible to boredom than other people. And so what I've worked on and what a coach would tell you is that if there's a pattern where in 2 to 3 years you kind of start looking for something else because it becomes very mundane, it may be a question of the job is okay, but maybe now you need to join a summer theater group, or you need to balance your life in some way outside of your job so that you in general are not bored anymore. So it may be that you're bored with the job, but it also may be that it isn't the job you're bored with, but that you mastered it and there's no challenge anymore. And so you have to decide, and this is a good place to decide, should I leave or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? Is this the job that I'm bored with? And is there a way to modify that, to kick it up a notch? Or is this a place where I should keep doing what I'm doing in my job, but maybe take on a whole new hobby or start something totally different on the side? it is a great question because boredom.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
It sets in. And 2 to 3 years
Well, this has
is
been
about the amount.
Right.
Yeah.
This has been so helpful that a number of people are asking, first of all, do you do phone consultations, one, and number two, would you come back and answer some of the many other questions that we didn't have time for today?
I would love to come back and answer questions. As I mentioned, I am not seeing clients or having clients of my own anymore. I am strictly training the trainer. So I'm working with Victoria Roche on the coach career services specialty training at Edge Foundation in an attempt to get more coaches out there who really understand the career piece. And there is such a gap between people that understand the ADD piece and people that understand the career piece. And Vicki and I are trying to bridge that gap.
That makes so much sense. So, folks, go find an ADHD coach. Wilma gave some great suggestions. Edge Foundation, ACO, Attitudes Directory, and these extremely helpful workplace questionnaires and slides will be posted on the webpage if they're not already. So these are great and so helpful.
One final thing, I think.
Yes.
One final thing. The last slide of the handout is a slide of my book, and everything I know is in there. So while I can't see people anymore, I'm very proud that Richard Bowles, who wrote What Color is Your Parachute, wrote the foreword for my second edition of my book. And
this is a great book. Yeah.
Oh,
terrific.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wilma. Wilma
you.
Fellman, and we're very grateful to your time, and these questions are super helpful. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more Attitude podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.